The Minnesota Vikings are frauds, and the Packers proved it in an epic beatdown 41-17 in a game that wasn't even really that close. And now the Green Bay Packers control their own destiny in the NFC playoff race, win in week 18, beat the Detroit Lions, and they are in. We're going to dig into all of it on today's live post-game show on YouTube.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at the Ultimate Football GM. Locked On Packers listeners get a 100% free boost on their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On in the game store. The Green Bay Packers absolutely dismantled the Minnesota Vikings in what will be an iconic beatdown in the Matt LaFleur era over the last 3 years. This was a smackdown, and this was also edification for everyone, myself included, that said all week, loudly and proudly, this Vikings team was fraudulent. And there was a lot of weirdness in this game. But don't let any Vikings fan tell you that it was lucky, because this is how the Vikings have been winning all year. Bounces this way, turn into an interception, kickoff return touchdown, missed field goals, doink field goals, unlikely plays. This has been the Vikings all season. And so for the Packers to get all of that stuff together in one game, yeah, that took some luck. But this was also a Packers team that absolutely clamped Justin Jefferson. The Packers had Justin Jefferson in absolute hell. He threw his helmet multiple times on the sidelines, Justin Jefferson. He was nowhere until the Packers started playing off coverage and stopped sending help. Jair Alexander clamped down arguably the best receiver in football, because Joe Barry said, you know what? We're going to learn from our mistakes. We're going to learn from our mistakes. That's what Joe Barry said, and that is an important step. Justin Jefferson, 5 targets, 1 catch, 15 yards, and it was in off coverage, soft, 2 shell safeties, and the Packers, this was in the second half, so the Packers were already winning 27-3. The game was no longer really, truly in the balance. Yes, you get a kick return touchdown. But I was told, you may recall Luke Braun on this show saying, oh, but the Vikings are situational masters. Oh no, they're so well coached in these situations. Okay. How many pre-snap penalties in this game? How many delay of games penalties? Now, third string center, sure. But substitution penalties. Had to call timeout or Rodgers was going to catch him in 12 men on the field. They had 10 men on the field on defense on one drive. But they're situational masters, right? No, they are frauds. And they have been all year. And they have there are 2 teams in the NFC North with positive point differentials. Neither of them won the division. And both of them went 1-1 against the Vikings, by the way. Now, okay, the Packers were up 14-3 in a game where they had 14 yards of offense at one point, but they kept pressuring Kirk Cousins. They kept getting their hands in passing lanes. They created those turnovers. So you can say fluky, you can say lucky. Okay. They had still to make the plays. TJ Slayton gets his hand on a pass. It turns into an interception. Russell Douglas gets his hand on a pass. It bounces to Darnell Savage. He returns it for a touchdown. Kenny Clark gets pressure on Kirk Cousins, who's not looking at Justin Jefferson being covered by Preston Smith for reasons that, I don't know, defy description. And it turns into a sack fumble at a critical juncture in the game. Now, offensively, this was not a super crisp game for the Packers. They ran the ball really well. Aaron Jones was a monster in this game, 14 carries for 111 yards. My God, 8 yards a carry. A.J. Dillon got the touchdown. They were able to pick up key first downs, throwing to Allen Lazard, Christian Watson. They had multiple times in this game deep down the field. Rodgers missed him. Rodgers, I didn't think played great in this game, but he didn't need to. He made the one big play at the end of the half that they needed, the Tonyan touchdown, and that at that point, it felt like the game was over. That the Vikings were just not going to come back because the defensive adjustments, and we have to, if we're gonna hate on Joe Barry, and I think there were plenty of reasons to hate on Joe Barry over the course of the season, we have to give him his flowers now. He was tremendous in this game to say, okay, Jair, you're gonna follow, not always, but you're gonna follow to some degree Justin Jefferson, and we're gonna send help. So be aggressive at the line of scrimmage. And oh my God, was he aggressive at the line of scrimmage? Two-hand shove. I mean, he was bench pressing Justin Jefferson at the line of scrimmage, Justin Jefferson has one of the best release packages in the game. Devontae Adams is number one. Justin Jefferson might be number two. And Jair locked him up at the line of scrimmage. And yes, he had some safety help on some, but not all. He had no safety help on that early pass breakup where he's in Justin Jefferson's shirt. Jair played awesome in this game. Joe Barry mixed things up. And I was saying this, we were talking to Rich Madrid and Sam Holman on Twitter about how Joe Barry has quietly really evolved this defense. They're mixing fronts. They're using Quay Walker as an edge defender. They're playing 5 linebacker looks. They're doing some weird stuff. They're disguising coverages. And they have a very versatile secondary. Darnell Savage had a great game. Played fast. Flying around. Had a tackle where he came up. Someone was holding up the ball carrier. I don't remember who the ball carrier was. And Savage comes in and just gives him a lick. Plays downhill with force. If he's going to do that, and Rudy Ford is going to play well. Quay Walker played well in this game. Devondre Campbell played well in this game. Your interior did what they had to do. TJ Slayton had some big plays. Devontae Wyatt had some big plays. You have the sack fumble. Preston Smith had a sack. Justin Hollins had a sack. This is how this defense starts to look like what we thought this defense was going to look like. And this was the kind of game, like take away some of the fluky stuff. Take away the return touchdown. Take away the interception touchdown. The Packers still won this game. If you take those 14 points off the board, the Packers still win by double digits. They dominated this football game. And yes, it took some turnovers, and you look at the final box score line, you see all the Vikings, they out-yardaged the Packers. A lot of that came in the fourth quarter. They scored 14 points in the fourth quarter when this game was over. This game was over. In fact, those last two drives, okay, 59 yards and 79 yards. So essentially half of their offensive output for the game came in the fourth quarter when it was over. It was Vince Carter at the dunk contest over. So who cares? And this is the version of the Packers that can be dangerous in the playoffs. We just saw what's going on in San Francisco. Well, I guess it's in Vegas, but with the 49ers, they won, but they barely won against Jared Stidham. The Saints just beat the Eagles. The Packers just beat the daylights out of the Vikings, and they already beat the Cowboys this year. Why not the Packers? Huh? Why not? This team played physical. This team played aggressively. This was their best defensive performance rallying to the football. They did it consistently, and I understand Quay Walker had the situation where he has the roughing the passer penalty. Yeah, don't do that. But at the same time, you like the aggressiveness. This team played with force. They played with verve. They played with intensity defensively. And when they do that, they have the talent, even without Rashawn Gary, to make teams pay. Yes, banged up offensive line. That's going to happen. The Eagles don't have Lane Johnson. He's probably not going to play in the playoffs. The Vikings are a playoff team. These guys are banged up for them. Do you think the Vikings want to see the Packers in a 2-7? No, that's probably not going to happen now. Probably going to be the 49ers. If you're the Packers, you got to feel really good about where this team is right now, because this was the question they needed to answer. Okay, they go to Miami, beat a good team. Okay, they beat a good team, but then we find out Tua, he's got a concussion. How much did that play into the 3 interceptions he threw after that? Okay, Vikings, as I mentioned, frauds, but a 12-3 team at the time. And ahead of them in the playoff standings, and as Vikings fans love to point out, ahead of them in the standings. And the Packers can't catch them in the standings. Not just one. Dominated. A have-to-have-it game. A have-to-have-it game. And I said this last week, and it needs to be reiterated. The punch them in the mouth and they'll fold thing, it's over. It's done. Because you start off awesome defensively. You force the 3 and out. You get the punt blocked, and it's just like, oh my God, here we go again. Right? But then they get the stop inside the 2 to hold the Vikings to a field goal. Now, we can quibble. The Vikings should have gone for it. By the way, the Vikings should have gone for it. They didn't. Situational genius Kevin O'Connell did not go. So the Packers fight. They didn't let them hang their heads on that. They weren't just like, oh bother. They didn't become Eeyore. No, they continued to play with the confidence of purpose, of saying, okay, this is what has to happen to win this game. You have to get a stop. They did. Okay, kick the ball off. Keyshawn Nixon does what Keyshawn Nixon does. Okay, who else has Keyshawn Nixon? No other team in the NFC has Keyshawn Nixon. He is right now the most combustible force on special teams in the NFL. The Packers have that guy. The most dynamic returner in the league right now plays in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So don't get punts blocked. Let Keyshawn cook. And this defense, they are finally, I think, believing in what they're doing. And that is such a vital piece to all of this that I think we have to give Joe Barry credit. We have to give these players credit. Darnell Savage deserves so much credit for staying ready. Stayed ready last week, got in the game, and played well enough to earn another start. Could have hung his head. Could have pouted like Justin Jefferson throwing his helmet. Could have let it take him out of this mentally. But instead, he stayed ready, and when the opportunity came, he seized it. And that's what the Packers have the chance to do right now, is take advantage of an opportunity. They're not hanging their heads. They think they can beat any team in the league right now. You tell me why they can't. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at the Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, dreams can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of the team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches, trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the drafts, and all the ups and downs of the season. This is a really fun opportunity to take full control. No other game, video game. There are plenty of other football games, but none of them give you this kind of control. You can play for 20 seasons if you want to. And Locked On Packers listeners can get a 100% free boost on their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On. That's Locked On. Go to the ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Make your second listen Locked On NFL. Daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories, plus in-depth conversations with the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday. And Monday, local insiders cover the weekend with the game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. Okay, so just a quick little refresher on where we are, everything playoffs. The Commanders decided to start Carson Wentz for reasons unknown to God or man. They lose, the Browns win, the Packers are in if they beat the Lions. That's it. Now, I have to say, part of me was like, okay, after the Browns won, was like, maybe it's better if the Eagles actually win so that the Vikings just feel like, well, can't get the 1 seed. And the difference between the 2 seed and the 3 seed, Kevin O'Connell has already said, I'm going to rest some guys, which, by the way, he didn't do. Darius Smith played a bunch of snaps. Danielle Hunter, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, all those guys played all the snaps. They tried to win this game. Do not let a Vikings fan tell you they did not try to win this game. Maybe they should have tried a little harder. Maybe they should have called the good plays in the first quarter instead of the fourth quarter, which was a thing that the Vikings fans were saying. Oh, no, well, they just saved their good plays. Well, they just saved their good plays for the fourth quarter, and they're just better situationally. No. Frauds. That's what they are. That's what they are and will continue to be. But I was just selfishly thinking, well, maybe it's better. The Vikings have nothing to play for. This is better. Because they won. Now it's easy to say now. This is better. They tried to win. They had plenty of reasons to try to continue to win. And they couldn't. They didn't. They couldn't. That's more important. They couldn't. Not just they didn't. They couldn't. And I like there are little things on the margins that I think are important. Dalvin Cook, 9 carries, 27 yards. The Packers were one of the worst run defending teams from nickel this season. Now the Vikings, one of the worst run offenses from 11 personnel this season. But the Packers were the movable force who faced the stoppable object, and they stopped them. Now, are they going to be able to do that against a 49ers team in the playoffs, an Eagles team in the playoffs? Probably not. But this was a good sign. Dalvin Cook is a good running back. And they held him in check. Justin Jefferson is an elite receiver. And they had a terrific game plan to stop him. So you look around the NFC and you say, okay, well, if the Raiders with Jarrett Stidham can take the 49ers to the brink, the Seahawks win. They're not going to get in. Doesn't matter. The Bucs win. Packers already beat the Bucs. They're going to the playoffs. Packers already beat the Vikings. Beat the daylights out of the Vikings. They're going to the playoffs. Packers beat the Cowboys. They're going to the playoffs. Now let's think back to some of these losses. Now the Jets are not going to the playoffs, but in the NFC, they lost to the Vikings. They're going to the playoffs. They lost to the Eagles. They're probably going to be the number 1 seed in the playoffs. They're going to the Giants. They lost to the Giants. They're going to the playoffs. They lost to the Lions. The Lions, they have to beat to get into the playoffs. That Lions team is good. This is going to be a dogfight next week. The Vikings, the Vikings I think are better than the Lions, but I'm not positive about that. I'm really not. I think there's honestly a case that the Vikings are the 3rd best team in the NFC North, especially after today. The Lions just beat them handily. The Packers just beat them handily. The Vikings fans are going to say, oh, no, it doesn't matter. We're not trying. They were trying. They could have still gotten the 1 seed. Don't tell me they weren't trying. The Packers are really going to have to play well. But all of this points to the fact that, yes, some of these games Like, they should not have gotten blown out by the Jets. That's a bad loss. I think that's really the only bad loss on the resume because, again, the Eagles, that's a one-score game with Jordan Love for a quarter. Aaron Rodgers has an all-time brain fart against the Lions, but the Lions are good. The Lions are good. They lose to the Commanders, who were in the playoff race until week 17. For whatever reason, they decided to start Carson Wentz. If they have Tyler Heineke in there, maybe he doesn't throw 3 interceptions like Carson Wentz. Maybe they win that game. Maybe there's 4 NFC East teams going to the playoffs. And the Giants, look, against all odds, the Giants are good. I mean, that team is not talented. People love to make excuses for Justin Fields, like, oh, he doesn't have any weapons. Like, what was he, 7 for 21 on Sunday? My God. And then, like, who is Daniel Jones throwing to? Richie James and Darius Slayton and like tight ends you've never heard of. That team is really well coached. Yes, the Packers lost to that team in a game that they were up 2 scores. They were up 2 scores on the Commanders. But they lost to playoff teams. Like, as far as good losses go, I'm not super into like spiritual victories and all that, like moral victories and all that stuff. But I think we're seeing now some of these teams are legitimately good that they lost to. The Giants loss looks better. And they still should have won that game. They still should have won that game. So now you go and if you beat the Lions at home in week 18, you go to the playoffs. You save this season. And who knows? Who knows what can happen? Who knows what the Packers can do? And wouldn't it just be a season like this where this is the team that beats the 49ers? This is the flawed team, no Rashawn Gary, rookie receivers, banged up all year, bad losses, 4-8 at the 12-game mark, and they're the ones to go to Santa Clara and finally get a win. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? Then you got to try Built Bar. I had one today. I had one yesterday. I have one almost every day. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. I've been trying over the last couple of weeks since Thanksgiving to do it. Got a trip coming up after the season to a tropical destination that, you know, I want to feel a little bit okay about. That's why Built Bar is going to help me, because they've got all these great flavors that taste incredible. I don't know how they do it. And they only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, but 7 grams of protein. So they fill me up, they fuel my body, and they're not going to be bad for me. So look, go check it out. Go check it out. Head to your nearest Walmart where they have them. Go to Sam's Club and grab a 13-bar box with our different flavors, brownie batter, churro. You can thank me later. Thanks for listening to Locked On Packers and making it your first listen. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the national insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. One last thing. I said this before the game, and I said, you know, this is the kind of game that you really need to get Aaron Rodgers' best. And I don't know that the Packers got Aaron Rodgers' best. They didn't end up needing Aaron Rodgers' best. He missed a couple throws to Christian Watson. He's hurt, coming back. They're trying to figure that out. This offense we saw over the last couple of weeks, and I know that's weird to say in a game that they score 41, but again, 14, you get 4 interceptions or 4 turnovers. You're not going to do that every week against playoff teams. This offense did not play a crisp game in all phases. And that's just fine. Like, sometimes you just have to ham and egg it. 5.2 yards per drive is not terrible, but it's not good either. 61 plays to get 315 yards. Actually very similar to what they did in Miami last week. But half of this game was out of reach. I loved what they did with the motion in the run game. That stuff is still really good. I wish they had some better answers in the passing game. I wish they had some better answers to get Christian Watson involved, but I don't know if they thought they were going to get Christian Watson in this game. I don't know what they thought they could get from him. So, and I don't know if they knew who was going to play on the offensive line. So David Bakhtiari back. Really interesting situation at right tackle. Yosh Nijman starts the game. Zach Tom rotates in and essentially stays there for the rest of the game. He just might be your new right tackle. And who knows, like this sets up an offseason where you might be able to have David Bakhtiari move on, save some money. And now Yosh Nijman is your left tackle, or maybe Zach Tom is your left tackle. Yosh Nijman is your right tackle, and you can save some money and have still a really good young offensive line. Devontae Wyatt, I thought, played really well in this game. TJ Slayton, it wasn't just Devontae Wyatt without Dean Lowry. I don't think it's a coincidence that more snaps for Devontae Wyatt, Dean Lowry, and Jordan Reed resulted in a better pass rush and a better run defense than the Packers had when Dean Lowry was getting snaps. It's just not a coincidence. Dean Lowry is not coming back. So it's going to mean more Wyatt snaps, more Slayton snaps. They had some critical TFLs in this game. Some pass, tips affecting passing lanes, creating pressure on Kirk Cousins. The Packers got their hands on 10 Kirk Cousins passes. 10 of 31 passes. A third of his passes, the Packers disrupted. TJ Slayton had 2 of his own. Quay Walker got 1. Darnell Savage got 1. You hit Kirk Cousins 8 times. The Vikings got Aaron Rodgers 3 times. And it wasn't, you didn't need the sacks. But you get the TFLs. You create negative plays. They didn't get gashed in the run game. They didn't get gashed in the passing game until the end. And so then it's just sort of like, well, whatever. Game was over. You got backups in there. Not that big a deal. This was the most complete game the Packers played, and the offense didn't even play that great. It was the defense. And this was sort of the version of the team we saw at the end of last year. That 49ers game, when the special teams pooped the bed, the offense didn't play great, but the defense was phenomenal. Phenomenal. If Aaron Jones just keeps running at the end of the first half, or you don't get a field goal blocked, or you don't get a punt blocked, the Packers win the Super Bowl thanks to what the defense did against the 49ers. By the way, a 49ers team they very well might face in the first round of the playoffs. Now, we're not going to look too far ahead. Not fair, but beat the Lions, that's probably the team that they're going to face. I don't know about you. I'm kind of excited for that. I'm kind of excited for that opportunity because there is no pressure. I know Pro Football Talk had that tweet that I did not agree with. I was like, oh, the Packers are more dangerous as a 7 seed than a 1 seed. I don't know about that, but I do think it's the case that being able to play freely and just go in and try and just wreck stuff is a really good position for this team to be in because they know what it's like to play from the front. They know what it's like to play a little tight. But a lot of the guys on this team, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Devontae Wyatt, Quay Walker, these are young guys who kind of don't know any better. Just let them go out there and play. Let them go out there and mess stuff up. It's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun to see how this season finishes. And just remember, if you forget, or if you remember nothing else from this episode, nothing else from this week, nothing else from this game, remember this one. The Minnesota Vikings are frauds. All right, we got Packers-Lions week coming up. This show is going to be in your podcast feed on Monday. We'll have Expert Tuesday, Zayu doing Wednesday, crossover Thursday, and of course, our live shows later in the week. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, like we are right now on YouTube, celebrating the fraudulent Minnesota Vikings. Skol Vikings. Skol. LOL. Blow the horn. Blow that damn horn. Frauds. Stay locked on Packers.